Last year, more than 6,000 U.S. veterans died by suicide. That's about 18 every single day. Brave men and women who have survived danger on the battlefield only to surrender their own lives back home. Many of them are dealing with mental illness like post-traumatic stress disorder, and the numbers obviously impossible to ignore. Joining me now to talk more about this problem, Tammy Duckworth. Her helicopter was shot down north of Baghdad 6 years ago. She lost both legs and partial use of one arm. Now she's the Assistant Secretary for Public and Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Good to see you again. We both got together for the Fisher House fundraising tournament on Monday just outside of Washington. Thanks for coming in.
And thank you and for CNN for being great supporters of that. You know, I spent 9 months in a Fisher House, and my husband was there 13 months, and I don't know that I could have thrived and recovered without that wonderful place.
Yeah, raised $625,000 for them, so it was a good day. Yeah. Let's turn to this issue of military suicides, because it is such an important and such a tragic issue. 6,000 members of the military, either active duty or veterans, kill themselves each and every day. Of the 18, every year, 18 every day, and of those 18, 5 are under the direct care of the Veterans Affairs Administration. What more does the VA need to do to try to attack this problem?
You know, John, I'm so glad you brought this up because it's such an important issue. It is something that DOD and VA are working very closely on. I'm not a mental health expert. I'm certainly not a suicide prevention expert, but, you know, I still serve in the military. And here's where I see it from a soldier's perspective, but also as a member of the VA team. We need to do more. We need to have better dialogue that takes away the stigma of mental health issues. We also need to increase access. In VA, we now have over 20,000 mental health experts across VA, led by people like Jan Kemp, who's really a leading voice in this issue. We started our suicide prevention hotline in VA, and then just this past year, we now have a chat room, which is critical. It's about getting the care to the veterans where he or she is.
Right. Congressman Harry Mitchell, who chairs the House Subcommittee on Oversight Investigations for the Veterans Affairs Committee, is pretty critical of the VA. He wanted to have a hearing last Wednesday. He asked you to attend. The VA indicated that you were not going to come. Why wouldn't you comply with the request? Well,
actually, the hearing was on suicide prevention, outreach, and advertising, and we wanted to send him the expert, somebody like Jan Kemp. I'm always happy. I've testified before Congress many times.
Yeah,
but
sure. He still wanted to see you there, though.
And I'm happy to go. But I want to make sure that we have a good dialogue about suicide prevention and what needs to be done. And to do that, you know, I can speak from layman's terms. We can talk about the fact that anybody that attempts suicide, that's not acceptable. Any veteran that's waiting for care, that's not acceptable. But we need to do more as an organization, we need to do more as a society. And so that's why we wanted to make sure that we had the right people there to answer those key questions of how do you increase suicide prevention among this population.
In canceling that hearing, here's what Congressman Mitchell said. He said, quote, "Many of our returning veterans and those who served in past generations bear wounds that can't be seen and are difficult to diagnose. We can't wait for them to come to the VA. The VA needs to go to them, be held accountable for their action or inaction, and be transparent with the progress of their efforts." He says to him, clearly you're not doing enough here.
We are not doing enough. Our society is not doing enough. But we're doing more now than where we were a year ago. We've had 6,800 saves from our suicide hotline, 225,000 telephone calls, and we started the chat room. I still, you know, personally, when I watch too much news coverage, I still think of and dream of Iraq. Yeah. And so we have to have this real strong dialogue in our country about mental health and what we need to do.
I talked to Steve Robinson, who you know well from Veterans for America. He says that one of the big problems is the handoff from the Department of Defense to the Veterans Affairs Administration. There are these warrior transition units at Army bases across the country. They have been criticized roundly by some people. There was an article in the New York Times last week that said this of the warrior transition unit at Fort Carson, Colorado. For many soldiers, they have become warehouses of despair, where damaged men and women are kept out of sight, fed a diet of powerful prescription drugs, and treated harshly by non-commissioned officers. Now, these WTUs are mostly under the purview of the Army, but at Fort Carson, at least, there's a pilot project where VA is involved with them to assess soldiers before they transition out of the military, I guess designed really to speed up them receiving benefits. But what do you think of these WTUs? Are they doing the job that they need to do? They're headed up not by healthcare professionals, but by regular military. Do those need to be looked at to ensure that the transition between active duty and veteran status is smoother?
Well, I think whether that organization falls under DOD or anything that falls under VA, we need to keep close eyes on this, because this is our most vulnerable population of veterans, which is the ones who are not doing their mission in combat, but are waiting to transition. They have a health care issue, they may have mental health, they may have a physical wound as well. And we need to make sure that that access is there. And so having VA there is critical. We're watching and we're trying to increase that access. In fact, as a member of National Guard, you know, we're using National Guard and the reservists so much more now in this war than we have in previous wars. We're there at that reintegration program when they first come back to get that handoff. It needs to be better. I'll be the first to say that and have that frank discussion. We're doing better, but we still have a ways to go, and that's why Secretary Shinseki and President Obama have done many things to improve access to care, increase our budget, get more VA staff into these facilities to make sure we get that very positive handoff. My experience with the handoff back in 2005 when I was injured and recovered would be very different today. We have things like women's health care coordinators at every one of our VA facilities now. We have OIF, OEF coordinators, people that didn't exist when I was going through 6 years ago, and they've made a great big difference. We have more to do, but we're getting there.
Tammy Duckworth, it's good to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming in.